thank you for being here. Thank you for the UFM of hosting us, the cinema school particularly, and good evening to all of you. So thank you for joining us, and for people that will view this later on. It is a pleasure for me to be here with such a notable author from whom I've learned a lot and a very wealth of information and wisdom. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me down to your university. It's enjoyable, educational for me. You teach, you learn. So um, I'm having a wonderful experience that I'm sure I will write about when I get back home.
So the title of tonight's talk is "The Business of Hollywood," and of course, all of us would wonder what does that mean, because it's very encompassing. It's something very wide. It's a wide subject that allows us to wander in a lot of directions, and it is really an interesting. And you'll see. So I won't talk as much because I'd rather show you the wealth of information and allow Mark to speak. What is the business of Hollywood? We were talking about earlier that one of these questions in life, and when someone is questioning you, is what is your business? It's a way of saying who are you? What are you doing? What is it all about? So what is the business of Hollywood?
That's a good question. Um, in any art form, you have two tracks. You have a business track, and you have an expressive track, a creative track. And sometimes they're very difficult to reconcile. Um, Hollywood, because it was an art form that was new when the industry began, it really hadn't reached the recognition that it has today. Here we are in a university teaching and learning some of what film is. There are some things you can't learn. There is a mystery to all art, and that mystery is the real challenge for you to try to identify it within yourself, and then find a way to express it with your personality through your films, through what you write or perform in, or produce, or direct. The key, I think, is making it both individual and universal. It's a pretty neat trick, and a lot of people try. But if you can find that balance in the universe of your work and your life, then you begin to understand this idea of business. Um, Hollywood really has three meanings. It's a place on the map in Los Angeles. It's a town. Um, it is an industry, the industry of communication through film, television, uh, video, whatever medium you prefer. But it's also an idea. And the idea is that you both reflect and you see through. So film is both a window and a mirror. The window is something that we as audiences can look through to try to find who you are, what you're trying to tell us, and how you're trying to tell us. The mirror is what we see in ourselves as we look at other people's work. And Hollywood has perfected that in its idea of being a medium of not just communication, but of meaning, of insight, of themes, of culture. If you want to learn the history of America, go to a history book and find out facts, dates, places, names, victories, defeats, inventions, crime, triumph, all of that. But if you want to understand the culture of America or of any country that makes movies, that's where you go. Because when you see a culture being examined by people who are actually living it as they're examining it, uh, that's when you begin to look through the window. Today, for example, we looked at a film from 1989, Camille Claudel. We looked at, and we wanted to see it compared to a film that we watched the other day, The Blue Angel from 1930, and I, we want to see the connections. We want to see the cultural identification between these two films. Now, they're certainly miles, time, eons apart in their specific time and place. But in other ways, they are the same film. And so this idea that certain themes and certain ways of presentation can tell you a universal story is really what film is all about. You know, with Alfred Hitchcock, one of my favorite directors, he made 52 films. But we as auteurists, which is a school of criticism that I belong to, we believe that Alfred Hitchcock made one movie 52 times, and that his growth in his ability to tell that story is what we're interested in when we watch a film. It's not the story as much as it is how you tell the story. And that is what I try to illustrate when I talk about film and when I write about film. It's really not facts and figures or storylines, of which there are in reality very few. It is the style of telling those stories that makes film personal, that makes an individual artist have an identity. So Hollywood is a town of style, both external and, more importantly, internal. And as people, it's almost, you can see it in a Jungian way, that each generation of filmmakers takes from the previous generation and filters it through their own idiomatic time. And that is why it's so important to look at films that have come before the films that you want to make. You know, in art, if we look at a Van Gogh, or we look at a Picasso, early Picasso, it's very modern. We call it modern art. But in film, for some reason, a film that is 10 years old, we say, oh, that's an old film. We don't, we want to see something new. So really the idea is to understand that film from the very beginning has a role in the development of today's film. And that's why I like to go back and look at certain movies to demonstrate that the style is ever evolving and that you learn what works by seeing both what works and what doesn't work, what succeeds and what fails. Those definitions are very subjective because one person's failure is another person's success. And how we perceive failure and success is really how we see our own values through that mirror. So the business of Hollywood is a conflict because when film began in America as an industry, the people in charge of the studios, the moguls, were not interested in creating art. They were interested in product, in creating factories where they could turn out as many movies as they could and just continually feed the hunger of audiences. It was the filmmakers who had to come up against that machine to overcome all the obstacles: time, money, stars, influences, censorship, distribution, who somehow could make that industrial medium personal. And those directors who could, we put in a pantheon of great artists that they were able, their personality was so strong that they could overcome all the natural obstacles. Now, when we go to the movies, we are participating in the business of movies. We're buying tickets. We are, buying videos, streaming, all of that. We're always participating in the business, but we're not that interested in the business. We're interested in the art that somehow can break through that medium. When I write biographies, what I try to do is to, as I've told some of my students who are here, I try to show you how the trick is done, as if film is magic. We all know the magic of movies. What I want to do is get behind that curtain. I want to stand in the sidelines or behind the stage and watch where that rabbit comes from that they pull out of a hat. And when I do that in my writing, I know that I am destroying an image, a magical, mythical image that you see in 2 dimensions. I try to go into a 3rd dimension, depth, and show you how the trick is done. And then the wonderful thing about film, and why I enjoy writing about it so much, is that you can then go back to the movies and the magic is still there. It's somehow, you still believe it, you still identify with it, you still buy it, and buying in both the business sense and the creative sense. And so that is both breaking the illusion and heightening the illusion, deepening the illusion. Film is all about expressing oneself in a universal fashion, so that even if you see a film from another country, another time, another place, there are things in those movies that you can identify with. Just like today, when we saw a film from France in 1988 about Rodin and Camille Claudel, there were certain things that our students who were in attendance picked up on right away, things they could identify with, things that they could relate to on their own level. That's what I try to do. I try to show you how great the trick is, how beautifully it's done. You know, when you go to a magic show and somebody saw somebody in heaven, how did they do that? I hope that person is okay. But you know they're okay. You know it's a trick. But you buy the illusion. And all I do really is show you how that trick is done. So not to ruin it for you, to make it better. So in the end, the business of film and the art of film are really the same thing. They work together harmoniously. Without the creative input, there's nothing to sell. Without the business, then you have no place to show your work. So there is an uneasy harmony between the business and the art, and I'm interested in both. I'm interested in how the business elevates the work and how the work elevates the business. So I hope that kind of gets to your question.
Let's try to synthesize for the benefit of the audience. You mentioned Hollywood is a town, is an industry, but it's also an idea. And I think we all have learned or grown under the shadow of this huge idea that Hollywood projects towards Latin America. And I would also like to add that it is a community. And for a time, you were one of the, or you are still one of the writers or the living memory of the life of this community. And as a community, it has had its historical stages, let's say some governed by the studio system or even the star system. And now that it's evolving into, let's say, Hollywoods that are, or studios or films that are like Hollywood, but being done or filmed or produced elsewhere. And the perfect example is the movie Parasites, which is a movie that is very Hollywood, but it's not Hollywood at all. And at the same time, Hollywood finds it like its own and awards it, but it's not even in English anymore. So it's like Hollywood displaced, but at the same time, it's still very much like a Hollywood movie. So we've grown with this idea of Hollywood, but you've told the story, the intimate story of the people that have shaped Hollywood as an idea. What would you like to tell us about these people that have made the industry or the Hollywood town or business come alive?
Wow. I mean, how many days do we have to spend on that question? Let me start by, I just want to quickly respond to Parasite, because as an American and a Hollywoodian, so to speak, I didn't think this was a great year in film for Hollywood. I thought that it was an off year. That's just my own opinion. And that if Hollywood couldn't find a movie made in Hollywood or in America to give the best picture to me, that was proof that this was not a great year. And I mentioned that to my students, and they really taught me something. They said, well, we see it as very hopeful. We see it as a conquest because it tells us that you don't have to be in the Hollywood system. You don't have to be American. You don't have to be part of that mainstream, and you can still win Best Picture. So, yeah, I thought to myself, that's right. What was I thinking? A little bit of jingoism snuck into my Hollywood Oscar thinking. And maybe it's because partly that the Academy, let me just digress from your question. I'll try to get back to it this way. The Academy, most of us think it's a TV show or it's an award ceremony, and it's a moment for Hollywood to show the world how great it is, but also to pat itself on the back. Look how great we are. Look what we do. And it began as a union busting academy, or it was a house union, when this factory that I was telling you about began. They had a saying, and maybe you've heard it applied to Hollywood or other places. If you don't come in on Sunday, don't come in on Monday. Have you ever heard that? That means that you're working 7 days a week, and if you take one day off, you're fired. And that pretty much was how Hollywood operated, especially writers. I mean, they tend to a room, typewriters, and they pounded out stories that could then be handed over to the filmmakers, to the actors, and create product.
Just hold on. Please remember that in creative writing class. That's what I expect from all of you.
And you will learn it if you go into the business.
Sorry.
Some things don't change.
I had to say that. I'm sorry.
Somewhere along the line, because Hollywood, the creation of the industry, was part of the Industrial Revolution, sooner or later, workers said, wait a minute, we don't want to work 7 days a week. We want to work less time and do better work. And so the idea of unions began to take shape, that maybe we could form a group together and take a stand against these conditions. And so the Academy which was made up at the time of management of all the moguls, got together and said, well, before we have any problems, let's create an academy, not a university, but an academy, and call it the Academy Awards. And instead of a raise or a day off, let's give everybody a little gold statue, gold-plated statue, and they'll be happy. So that didn't really work. 3 years later, because of um, the Labor Act, the Wagner Act, which was passed in 1932 by the Roosevelt administration, FDR, unions were legalized for the first time. And Hollywood, as a result, began to unionize. And that changed not only the structure of working, but the product, because the mentality of workers began to rise, that even though you were part of a system, you had a chance to express yourself individually. And that is really the beginning of the growth. You know, before the Academy, with the exception with someone like Charlie Chaplin, who was the same thing as his movies, there were no stars. There were no close-ups. You didn't go to see a John Wayne movie. You just went to see film shot in middle shots, not close-up. There was no such thing as a close-up. So you had a middle shot and occasionally a long shot, not too long because everything was shot in a studio. So the idea of stardom was a way of Hollywood to sell its product. So that is the invention out of business. That is a creative invention. Let's move the camera in and make these faces individual. So you have this idea of individualism promoting the business of Hollywood. And that's how we developed a language. You use a close-up for emotional intensity when you want to see somebody's reaction. You use a long shot or a wide shot to give an epic overview. This is the language of film. And so when you learn the tools, then it's up to you to be able to use those tools to build a great house. And you learn them, you learn some of the equipment, you learn how to put a film together, but you can't learn the mystery of making that work. You have to have something that drives you to overcome all the obstacles, to be able to maintain your individuality, your dignity, and your message. And Hollywood, the idea, has always been against that. It's always, that's why so many films look alike and sound alike. You have one Star Wars, you have 50 Star Wars. You have one Dirty Harry, you have 50 almost Dirty Harrys. It's everybody trying to promote a passive message that works. So in success, there's safety. And the real heroes of Hollywood are the people who say, you know, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do it my own way and try to get it into the system so that it can be taken on one level and it can be taken on another level, both mirror and window. And so the people I write about, I don't know if I can be my own critic. I'm sure I can. Are those who fought against passivity. That is my main theme. When you write a biography, you spend 2 or 3 years of your life in an intimate relationship with your subject. It helps if they're dead, but okay, even then, it's even better. You have to like that subject. You have to find something in that subject that will compel you to go back to your work and continue to write and continue to explore. So I never choose subjects that I don't like, even though some critics say, how could you write about this? I like my subjects. I don't like them amorously. I don't like them mythically. I like all their conflicts, all their successes, and all their failures. I like their attempts. And usually the people I choose are battling conformity. Um, I'll give you an example. Besides Clint, uh, um, Erin Brockovich. You all know Erin Brockovich? You know the movie, right? When I wrote that story, which then became that movie, I saw it very clearly as a woman taking on the system, taking on the corporate system, the industrial system. In this case, Pacific Gas and Electric, like Don Quixote, like Samson and Delilah, the little person taking on the big villain and somehow succeeding. You know, as Bob Dylan says, you lose every battle and you win the war. So that is how I saw Erin Brockovich. Not a lot of people saw her that way. They saw her as a kooky blonde who somehow got involved with the personal lives of the people she was defending, and they remember the motorcycle guy, all of that, the boyfriend. But I saw it as a challenge that even though she was not a lawyer, even though she was not trained, her instinct was right on the money. She knew right from wrong. She understood that she was both fighting for herself, and if you remember from the movie, she was living in a trailer park and all that, and had those kids and no husband. She had the courage of her convictions, and that courage brought her to a point where she slayed the dragon. Um, and when I saw that and met with her, I understood that that was the story, and that's how that film got made. Um, while we were writing the book, Erin was going for a massage, and she always had a tendency to talk a lot, like me, and she was telling the masseuse this story that I was actually telling her. I was telling her what her own life meant. And talk about arrogance. There it is. And I'm saying, no, Erin, this is what happened. And then she went back and told her masseuse, you know, when I was doing this, I was really doing this. And the masseuse happened to be married to a producer at Universal Pictures. And that's how that film got made. So again, you go against that machine. My job is to see these people for who they are, to understand the nature of their character and how their character, and as you know from Sophocles, and their fate are really the same thing. And so with Erin, I knew that her character was the reason that she succeeded in what she did. And when you look at films, we try to understand character along with action, because ultimately, as Fitzgerald said, action is character. And so when you're writing, all you screenwriters out there and directors, you don't need a lot of explanation. You don't need a lot of aphorisms. You don't need a lot of morality tales. You need to somehow express your character through your action. That's movie making. You've got to, in a sense, de-intellectualize your work. You've got to stop moralizing and telegraphing what the message is. Forget about the message. Show the action. And that will bring you to the message. That'll be the audience's job. So when I tell my stories about people's lives, I look at them as talent, as mystery, as people who have somehow been able to balance a scale that seems unbalanceable. And that's what I'm interested in how they achieve what they've achieved. Flaws, imperfections, all of it. I'm not interested in writing puff pieces or books full of compliments. You get that elsewhere. You get that in Entertainment Weekly or wherever you look for that stuff. That's not what I write about. I'm interested in imperfection because imperfection is the pathway that they use to success, to reaching you. Why? Because you're not perfect either. And when we see perfect people on screen or in books, we can't really relate to that. We can relate to a human being with the same imperfections we have. The only difference, maybe, is that somehow they find a way to cross the Red Sea without drowning. And most of us are afraid to even dip our feet into the Red Sea for fear of drowning. You have to get rid of that fear. You have to be ready to drown in order to get to the promised land. If I may make a biblical analogy there. That's courage in another way. Courage on screen might be taking on a barroom of angry bad guys, but the courage to tell that story is the invisible element in film. That's why we, as auteurs, a school of criticism that I belong to, we talk about the invisible character on screen in every film that works. And that invisible character is the personality, the voice, the morality, the courage of directors and writers and producers. That's what you don't see. So when you go to a movie, you are seeing the tip of the iceberg. And what I'm interested is showing you the whole iceberg, how that tip comes to a point. I'm interested in how it's formulated, why it's there, what the mechanism is that allows you to see the tip. And even though you know everything else is down there, all you see is that tip. I want to tell you about the rest of it. I want to put the invisible character of the films that I like into biography so you can understand what it is that you're seeing on a different level. So Clint Eastwood, man against the world, loner, with a fallibility, an inability to be romantic on screen. I ask anybody in this room to name a Clint Eastwood film where he lives happily ever after with the girl. If you can, let me know because I haven't seen it. His character cannot relate that way. And so he brings something to film, which is essentially a romantic medium. We crave when we go to the movies a happy ending. For some reason, we need that. We need a resolution that leaves us feeling good. The key ingredient to successful movies, feeling good when you leave. But with Clint Eastwood films, you don't necessarily feel good. You may feel tough. You may feel fought against. You may feel deprived of an element of emotion, but you also leave feeling that this is somebody who did what he wanted to do, both on screen and off screen. This was a man, or is a man, with the courage of his convictions to tell stories that aren't just love stories, John and Mary or this one and that one. His stories are about something else. His stories are about courage, about how being a loner, being not accepted by society in a traditional way doesn't make you less of a person in society. That is the key to Clint Eastwood, that individualism, that standing away from the crowd, doesn't make you less of a person. And that's why I admire Clint Eastwood so much, because all his films deliver the same message, and it's different. The reason why his films are different is because they look different, they sound different, and his characters behave in a kind of an alternate universe from mainstream Hollywood. And that's why, he broke away from the system and created his own world up there in Northern California, because he rejects the passive world of commercial filmmaking, and yet belongs to it. So rather than rebelling and separating himself and contemplating his own navel in his house up on the cliff, he goes into the system with the idea that he can somehow change it, that he can somehow deepen it, that he can add something by being in the system. And that, I think, is the key. Walt Disney, when Walt Disney came to Hollywood, he couldn't break into the system for a number of reasons, which I won't go into now. But he arrived in 1922. By 1922, the studio system was set. The moguls, the pioneers, they were all in charge. They had distribution, they had production, they owned movie theaters. And trying to break into the old boys club was not an easy thing to do. So what did Walt Disney do? He created his own universe. He couldn't afford to pay actors, so he drew characters. I mean, out of every inspirational creative action, sooner or later, you'll find the business side of it influencing it. So out of an inability to afford to make movies, Disney created the world of animation. And in all his films, all his animated films during his lifetime, not what it is now, all his characters are looking to belong. Dumbo, looking to belong. Doesn't really belong, the big ears, but has to prove himself worthy. Pinocchio, a wooden boy who wants to be a real boy. It's Walt Disney's life. Somebody who wants to belong, who wants to be part of the community. And he did so by showing that he wasn't. I mean, this is, the essence of creativity is by showing you belong, by creating characters who you think don't belong. I mean, that's certainly Clint Eastwood. Dirty Harry is certainly that guy, who breaks every rule and in the end solves all the problems by breaking the rules. These are people I like. These are people who influenced me in my formative years. People who were against the grain and were able to take all the bruises by doing so, and somehow at the end triumphing, being triumphant. So as filmmakers, you need to find a way to express your personality and yet make it palatable enough that you can get your story in. That's what it's all about. Who else have I written about? Jack Nicholson, Phil Oakes, music people. I forgot my own Cary Grant. Cary Grant is a perfect example. One of the most remembered things that he ever said. And you all know who Cary Grant was. Some of you don't. Very good looking, charismatic leading man from England who came to America and became everybody's love interest. I know one of the reasons I wrote the Cary Grant biography is because he was my mother's favorite actor. And whatever Freudian conflict was going on between Cary Grant and me, whatever that was, why don't you love me like you love Cary Grant? I wanted to find out who this guy was. What did my mother love about him so much? And that's enough. That's enough to put you on a path. Who is he? Why do people identify with him? What is behind that facade where the real action is? What's under the surface of that iceberg? Cary Grant said later in his life, and this was the opening key for me. This was the first unlocking of the first door. He said, somebody said to him, how does it feel to be Cary Grant? And he said, he thought about it for a minute and he said, everybody wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant. Yeah, that's it. So who are you if that's who you want to be? Who are you really? And where did you get that image, that iconography? Where did that come from? That's what my book is about. Someone who went up against the industry physically from another country, England, and also an industry that wanted to make him like all the other stars, and he wasn't. He was unique. He was an individual with all the darkness intact. You know, the irony of Cary Grant, and I don't want to, if you're going to read the book or in the middle of it, you cover your ears for a second, is that he was gay. And this was something that I discovered along the way. And think about it. Think about someone who is iconographic as a leading man whose life is so different and his values so different. What is the connective tissue there? Maybe that's what Cary Grant meant when he said, even I want to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be normal. Even I want to be like everybody else. Normal with quotations around it. So he was able to find a way. I think I told this story to the class yesterday or today. I'll tell you again. When he got married to a woman, he was married 5 times. He went back to England with his wife. They took a cruise ship, and his boyfriend, by the way, all 3 of them. It's a very interesting mix. They went over. There was a big public wedding. Everybody throwing rice, all of that stuff. The honeymoon night, the next day, he woke up and he turned to his wife, Virginia Gray, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "What do you mean, what am I doing here? We got married." And Cary Grant said, "I know, but that's the end of the movie when you get married. That's the end of the story." Now, you know, during the course of the writing of that book, I happened to find Virginia Gray's diary. Her girlfriend, her best friend, gave it to me. She was still alive. And there it was. There that story was. And, you know, I had to think about, what the heck was he talking about? Marriage is supposed to be the beginning. Well, here's what he was talking about. In the movies, movies end when couples get married. We're not interested as audiences in the day-to-day drudgery of making a marriage work, of children, of mortgages, of car payments, of working 2 jobs, of having a fight with your wife, or any of that stuff. We're interested in how couples get together, the romance, not the reality. And Cary Grant, I think, sometimes confused reality with romance on many levels. So when he turned and he saw that Virginia Gray was still there, he thought the end of the movie was marrying her. And that, you know, the next door opens up. You see a series of doors that you have to go through until you reach the end of these progressive moments. That, to me, you know, that opened up a whole world to me of how actors get confused, not only through our eyes, but through their own eyes. They become another person. And that's what separates technical actors from personality actors. When we go to see a Cary Grant movie, we don't go to see him play some character like we do, say, with Edward G. Robinson or Humphrey Bogart, you know, where they're playing good guys or bad guys, or Jimmy Cagney, song and dance guys, gangsters. We go to see a Cary Grant movie. We want to see Cary Grant and a woman fall in love with him and get married. That's what we like when we see him. When we see Clint, we want to see Clint break all the rules and somehow come out on top. These are personality actors. They don't play, they don't put on disguises like Orson Welles. They don't gain weight like Robert De Niro for Raging Bull. They're essentially themselves. The other side are the technical actors, the ones who do just that, who lose themselves in roles. Well, I find that less interesting and less courageous than putting yourself out there and saying, this is who I am. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. The actors that we love and the actresses that we love are people who have the courage to put it out there and show it to us. And we love them for it. That's why when someone says, oh, I love Cary Grant, there's something more to that than just an expression. It means that that idealized image is not only what we hope he really is, but it's what we hope we are. I mean, that's what movie making is all about. We are Clint Eastwood, or we want to be Clint Eastwood, or we want to be the best part of Clint Eastwood. We want to be that tip of the iceberg. And so many of us in life fail at in our dreams, in our hopes, because we don't understand what those dreams are, what those hopes are. And part of the reason we don't is because we let other people tell us what to dream and what to hope. The people I write about reject that. And they say, I'm going to do it the way I believe I can do it. Jack Nicholson, all of them. Phil Oakes, a singer you probably never heard of, who was one of my early inspirations because he went against that grain, took the splinters, and was triumphant. So to me, the world that I write about is a world that I love. And so when somebody says, oh, you said something about this guy that was terrible, they don't get it. they don't get it. They don't see the bigger picture. And I'm about the bigger picture, I hope.